Alright, let's do this. Number 7. Decimation. If a Roman legion showed cowardice in battle, retreated without orders, or otherwise disgraced itself, the commanding general could order a punishment called decimation. The word literally means removal of a tenth. Here's how it worked. The entire legion was assembled. The soldiers were divided into groups of 10. Each group drew lots. The soldier who drew the short lot was beaten to death by the other 9 members of his group, not by executioners, not by officers, by his own friends, his tent mates, the men he had eaten with, marched with, and fought beside. They were required to use clubs and stones, not swords. It was meant to be slow. After the execution, the surviving soldiers were put on reduced rations and forced to sleep outside the camp walls, exposed to the elements and enemy attack. The punishment was rare, but it was real, and it was documented multiple times. Marcus Licinius Crassus ordered decimation of his legions during the war against Spartacus in 71 BC. The general's logic was simple. If you're more afraid of the enemy than you are of your own army, the army has a discipline problem. Decimation solved that. After a decimation, no Roman soldier ever had to wonder what was worse, the enemy or his own commander. The answer was always the commander. Number 6. Vomitoriums and feast purging. Romans of the upper class held elaborate feasts called convivium that could last for hours. Multiple courses, exotic meats, imported wines. Enough food to feed a neighborhood. And when wealthy Romans were too full to continue eating, some of them would excuse themselves, induce vomiting, and return to eat more. This practice was documented by multiple Roman writers, including Seneca, who described it with open disgust. He wrote that they vomit so that they may eat, and eat so that they may vomit. The feasts themselves were displays of wealth and social power. The richer you were, the more elaborate your feast. Peacock tongues, flamingo brains, dormice stuffed with pork and pine nuts, sea urchins, jellyfish. If it was rare and difficult to obtain, it was on the menu. Guests reclined on couches arranged around a central table, eating with their hands. Slaves served each course. Entertainment was provided between courses, including music, poetry, and sometimes live performances. Now, the popular myth that Romans built special rooms called vomitoriums for the purpose of vomiting between courses is not accurate. A vomitorium was actually an architectural term for the passageways and amphitheaters that allowed crowds to exit quickly. But the practice of purging during feasts, while not universal, was real and documented. It was the ancient Roman equivalent of an all-you-can-eat buffet, except the buffet cost more than most people's homes, and the reset button was your finger down your throat. Number 5. Gladiator blood is medicine. Romans believed that drinking the blood of a fallen gladiator could cure epilepsy. This was not a fringe belief. It was mainstream Roman medicine, endorsed by physicians and practiced for centuries. The Roman physician Scribonius Largus, who served Emperor Claudius, prescribed gladiator blood as a treatment for epilepsy. The naturalist Pliny the Elder wrote about the practice extensively, describing how epileptics would rush into the arena after a fight to drink blood directly from the wounds of dying gladiators. After gladiatorial combat was banned in the 5th century, the practice evolved. People began drinking the blood of executed criminals instead. The underlying medical theory was that blood from someone who died violently contained a special life force that could transfer vitality to the sick. This belief persisted for over 1,000 years, well into the medieval and Renaissance periods. In 17th century England, people still attended public executions specifically to collect blood from the condemned. The practice only fully died out in the 18th century. For context, that means humans were drinking the blood of dead people as medicine for roughly 1,800 years, longer than Christianity has existed in most of Europe, all because a Roman doctor looked at a guy having a seizure and thought the cure was at the bottom of a gladiator's neck wound. Number 4. Urine as mouthwash and laundry detergent. Ancient Romans used urine for 2 very specific practical purposes. First, they used it as mouthwash. The ammonia in aged urine acts as a bleaching agent, and Romans discovered that swishing it around in your mouth could whiten teeth. The poet Catullus mocked a man named Ignatius for his suspiciously white smile, implying he had been rinsing with urine. This wasn't a secret practice. It was common enough to be the subject of public humor. Second, and more importantly, urine was the primary chemical agent used in the Roman laundry industry. Workers called fulons, essentially ancient dry cleaners, collected urine in large vats placed on street corners. Citizens were encouraged to urinate into these public collection pots. The urine was aged until the urea decomposed into ammonia, and then clothes were soaked in it and stomped on by workers who spent their entire day standing in troughs of old urine, kneading garments with their feet. The industry was so profitable that Emperor Vespasian placed a tax on the collection of urine. When his son Titus complained that the tax was undignified, Vespasian held up a gold coin and said pecunia non olet, money doesn't stink. That phrase is still used today. The original context is a man defending his right to tax public urination because the pee was too economically valuable to ignore. Number 3. Paterfamilias and the right to kill your own children. In Roman law, the male head of the household, called the paterfamilias, had absolute legal authority over every member of his family. This included the right of vitae nescisque, the power of life and death. A Roman father could legally execute his own children at any age for any reason. This was not a theoretical power, it was exercised. Roman historians documented multiple cases. When a newborn was born, the baby was placed at the father's feet. If the father picked up the child, it was accepted into the family. If the father turned away, the child was exposed, meaning it was left outside to die or be picked up by anyone who wanted it. Exposed children were often taken by slave traders. The father's authority extended throughout his life. Even adult sons who held public office, commanded armies, or served in the Senate were technically still under the legal authority of their living father. A father could sell his adult children into slavery. He could annul their marriages. He could seize their property. This absolute authority weakened over time. By the later Roman Empire, the power of life and death had been restricted by various emperors. But for centuries, Roman law treated the father as an absolute monarch within his own household, with powers that would be considered psychopathic by any modern standard. Number 2. The triumph and public humiliation of conquered kings. When a Roman general won a decisive military victory, the Senate could award him a triumph, a massive celebratory parade through the streets of Rome. The triumph was the highest honor a Roman could receive, and it was one of the most elaborate spectacles in the ancient world. The procession included captured weapons, stolen treasure, paintings depicting battle scenes, exotic animals from conquered lands, and most importantly, the defeated enemy leaders, chained and forced to walk through the streets while Roman citizens jeered, threw objects, and celebrated their humiliation. At the end of the parade route, the captured kings and commanders were typically taken to the Tullianum, Rome's underground prison, and executed by strangulation. Vercingetorix, the Gallic chieftain who united the tribes of Gaul against Julius Caesar, was paraded through Rome in Caesar's triumph in 46 BC after spending 6 years in a dungeon. He was then strangled to death in the prison. Jugurtha, the king of Numidia, was paraded in the triumph of Gaius Marius and then thrown into the Tullianum, where he was either strangled or starved to death. The triumph was not just a celebration, it was a message. Every conquered king walking in chains through the streets of Rome was a living advertisement for what happened to people who resisted Roman expansion. The celebration of your greatest victory was inseparable from the public destruction of another human being's dignity. Romans didn't just win wars, they turned the aftermath into entertainment. Number 1. The Vestal Virgins and being buried alive. The Vestal Virgins were 6 priestesses who served the goddess Vesta, the guardian of the hearth and the sacred flame of Rome. They were selected between the ages of 6 and 10 and served for 30 years, during which they were required to maintain absolute chastity. Their primary duty was to keep the sacred flame in the temple of Vesta burning at all times. If the flame went out, it was considered an omen of disaster for Rome. The Vestal who let it go out was beaten, but the real punishment was reserved for any Vestal who broke her vow of chastity. Because Vestals were considered sacred, it was forbidden to shed their blood. So the Romans devised a punishment that technically complied with this rule while being one of the most horrifying execution methods in history. The convicted Vestal was dressed in funeral clothes, placed in a sealed litter, and carried through the streets of Rome in a funeral procession while she was still alive. Citizens lined the streets in silence. The litter was brought to a small underground chamber near the Colline Gate. Inside the chamber was a bed, a lamp, and small amounts of bread, water, milk, and oil, so that the Romans could claim they hadn't technically killed her, they had simply left her in a room. The entrance was sealed with earth. She was buried alive. The man she had been intimate with was also punished. He was stripped naked, tied to a stake in the forum, and beaten to death with rods in public. Romans took the virginity of their priestesses so seriously that they invented a method of execution specifically designed to kill someone without technically killing them. The legal reasoning was that if she had food and water, they hadn't executed her. The fact that she was sealed in an underground tomb with no way out was, legally speaking, not their problem. Those are 7 traditions from the civilization that built roads we still use, laws we still follow, and an empire that lasted over 1,000 years. From beating soldiers to death for cowardice to burying priestesses alive for having sex, the Romans had a very specific understanding of discipline, duty, and consequence. If you found this video interesting, hit subscribe because we go deep on the stories that shaped the world. Drop a comment and tell us which tradition